Young Lions, Jazz Master, Virtual Sessions, Brandon Robertson back with us. How's it going, Brandon?
Doing well, sir. Thank you for having me this morning.
I see you're standing up and you got upright in your hand.
Yes, I got Miss Bertha here this morning, so her and I are gonna teach a little class.
All right, well, we're
For you
looking forward to having you
kids.
back. We've got everybody muted for the courtesy of the session, but the chat feature is always there for questions, and we can get those to Brandon. Thank you to our sponsors of these sessions, Blue Water Wealth Management at Steward Partners, Duke Energy, and Marine Max Clearwater for presenting the podcast where you can listen to all these sessions after the fact. The studio is what we call the resource on the website where all of these sessions get archived also after the fact, and they're organized by topic. They're really great. There's a bunch of them in there, so we hope you're finding good value in them. General topics, instrument-specific topics. There's a What I Love About series, which dives deep into legends of jazz and other players, professional musicians that have inspired the educators that participate in these sessions, as well as a conversation with series, and just a lot of great stuff. So Brandon's been a regular part of this. He's been really special to Clearwater Jazz Holiday Education and outreach, particularly over the last couple of years. If you go to the studio or you go on the podcast, you're going to see a lot of sessions that Brandon has done with us already. Just to name a few, Where Do I Begin as a Professional Musician, Tempo and Style, How to Develop Endurance During a Performance, Playing Duo Performances, How to Accompany a Vocalist, Part 1 and Part 2, Audition Preparation. He's done several conversation with series, as well as the What I Love About series. The last couple he did were on Paul Chambers and Jaco Pastorius, and he did a left hand shapes for bass, transcription session, negotiating a gig. I mean, he's covered so many really cool topics, and we're excited to have him back today for a session topic that he's calling New Ways to Practice, Make It Fun. And I know he will do that because he always does that with us. And if you look at the upcoming sessions at clearwaterjazz.com's education and outreach session, you're also going to find a bunch of upcoming sessions from some incredible musicians and educators, and a lot more from Brandon. So thanks for participating. Let me tell you a little bit about Brandon. I'm going to turn it over to him. Brandon's an Emmy nominated music director, professional upright and electric bassist. He's a composer. He is a music educator. He's originally from Tampa, completed his BA in music from Florida State in 2009, Master of Music and Jazz Studies in the spring of 2016. Currently, Brandon is the Director of Jazz Studies at Florida Gulf Coast University in Fort Myers, Florida. In 2018, Brandon was nominated for an Emmy Award for Best Documentary for Educational Collegiate Programs featuring the Florida Gulf Coast University Jazz Ensemble. He's a prominent band leader, taking his band on multiple national tours, headlined at some of the top jazz venues around the country. And to add to this impressive resume, he has performed with many notable acts, including the world-famous Count Basie Orchestra, led by Scotty Barnhart, director, vocalist Carmen Bradford, Jason Marsalis, Marcus Roberts, Marty Morell, Wycliffe Gordon, and the list goes on. He's been featured as a performer and band leader all around the country, and he has released his first debut album titled Based on a True Story in the fall of 2019, which reached all the way to number 16 on the iTunes Top 200 release. That's Based, B-A-S-S apostrophe D. Get it? Get it? Based on a true story. So, Brandon, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, man. It's so great to have you back with us. Always a pleasure. Thanks for doing this.
Oh man, thank you guys. First of all, let me start off by saying that I absolutely love you all. Y'all are family now, and we've been doing this for a while, and it just seems that it gets better and better each time, and you guys keep coming out with better and more thriving and educational material. So thank you all for continuing to have me. You know, it's an honor, and I'm humbled to keep doing this because I love doing these things. So let's jump right into it. So for everybody who's watching this, so here's what we're gonna do today. I discovered something recently. Me being a professional bassist now for the last 12 years, I've been a professional bassist for 12 years now. I've realized that I hate practicing. And I don't say that like with an intent. It's more like an annoyance. Oh man, I actually have to get up and practice whatever it is I have to do. I can't just do it because I know I'm good enough to just do it, but I know I have to practice it, right? So now it becomes not fun for me. And the one thing I absolutely despise practicing, and I don't like doing it, but I do it, I force myself to do it, is scales. And now everybody's going to look at this and say, oh, here we go, another video talking about scales and why scales are important, blah, blah, blah. Nope, that's not what I'm doing today. So before you go that route, you might want to pump the brakes, ride with me for a second. Jump in the passenger seat, let's take a little cruise, and I'm gonna ride you through this process, all right? So, I discovered that working out of the John Patitucci 60 Melodic Etude book. It's a bass melodic etude book that John Patitucci wrote, and he created these melodic etudes off of scales. So what he does is he'll have a page with the scale, actual scale written out, fingerings, etc. Then the next page you'll have an etude that is specifically derived from that scale. So all the notes are all only from that scale. And so as I started to practice through this book, I realized something. I said, man, you can actually make practicing fun if you know how to approach it. And so there's a couple of disconnects that I think young musicians have sometimes. When you're practicing, you have been programmed to just say, okay, play the C major scale. Okay, you're programmed to just do that. However, no one has ever stopped to say or tell you to stop and say, well, there's more to that scale. These are pitches. These are intervals. And these intervals have connections. So for a young player who is trying to develop their ear, it would make sense for you to take the time to maybe take one scale and really dissect it and really pick it apart. So let's start with the C major scale, all right? We're going to just start with a very simple scale, no accidentals, sharps, flats, none of that. We're not even going to deal with that today, right? But what I'm going to demonstrate is, here are the connections. Now, I'm a bass player, so this can kind of go two ways here. This can either go for just basses, but for folks who are watching this on other instruments, this is another way of thinking, another train of thought of thinking, right? So me as a bass player, I'm trying to think of the most melodic way I can walk a bass line. So if I'm playing C majors, over a, something, a C13 chord, so, So I'm outlining all the notes in that chord, right? However, if I'm just practicing the C major scale, okay, that's cool. But what if I thought of it from that perspective? Well, let me try to make a melody out of my scale. I have 7 different pitches that I can create some type of melodic phrasing. So now, what I'm doing now is taking what I call my practice time, and I'm making it practical, but I'm making it more interesting for myself. So here's one approach. Make up a bunch of random notes to see how they connect. And I tell my bass students to do that sometime when they're trying to create bass lines, because they say, well, professor, I can't hear how the bass line moves. I said, well, sometimes if you just associate a measure with just some random group of notes, but then you're able to figure out, like, how does this note connect to this note, and how does this note not connect? So if I do something like this, for instance, doesn't sound bad, but where's the connection? I did the first root, the second, the major seventh, and the major third. Now, I have two important notes that are strong in this case, which is the major third and that seventh. However, this second, the connection or the distance or the relevancy of that particular motion doesn't make sense. So I teach my bass students, when you're playing scales, you're doing more than just learning a scale. You're learning a musical way of how to speak the language. And I'm not talking about just jazz language, just musical language, just continuity in your musicality of a musician. Knowing how to effectively get your point across without it just sounding like you're mumbling or just jumbling out a random cluster of notes. So when you all are practicing, whatever that is, a scale, if you're practicing the etude, if you're practicing a piece, or in this case, if you're learning a tune, if you're learning a jazz tune, you want to approach it like that. So obviously, you have to learn it the traditional way first. That's first and foremost. You have to learn it the traditional way. There's no other way around it. I'm not going to skip corners and tell you guys, well, here's some ways that you cannot do that. Nope, you need to learn it from scratch, the original way, how the melody was originally written and performed first. Then you start to dive in and find other records and such. But when you're practicing this stuff, you want to try to find a way to make it innovative and learn. So Clark Terry said this quote: "You imitate, you assimilate, and then you innovate." And so in that same process, when you're practicing, you want to imitate the things that you've been trying to learn and retain. So if I heard a bass player, for instance, I'm gonna stay in the key of C. If I heard a bass player do this bass line in the key of C, if I heard that and I was like, oh, okay, I like that. So now I'm going to imitate that. So I'm going to try to learn what I just did. So when I'm practicing it, I'm going to try to practice it the way I want to perform it. And so sometimes, everyone, when you all are practicing, the fun part of it is you should try to practice it the way you actually want to present it to an audience. And you may think, that's kind of silly. I made my entire my entire bass studio here at FGCU. I made my whole studio perform in recital class earlier this semester. And I actually had them do this. I actually made them practice how they were going to perform, how they were going to present themselves. So they had to get up, speak to me in the whole entire class. They had to dress up. They had to actually play their piece how they want everyone to perceive it and have the perception of it. Next thing you know, when they actually performed it, it turned out to be something that was remarkable for all of them, and they learned from that. So when you're practicing, I always teach my students that you need to practice how you would like to perform. So if I heard, like going back to that statement I just made, if I heard that bass player played that bass line, I don't know if that was exactly, but it was something similar. Now I'm imitating that. Now I have that. Now I need to assimilate that information into my playing. Now what that means is you need to break down what it is that you just learned. Okay, so he goes, okay, he's playing the root. He hops over to the major seventh. Then he plays the major third. Then he goes to the sixth. Then he goes to the five. Then he goes to the two. Back to the major seventh, but an octave lower. Back to the root. So now what you're doing is you're assimilating this information, and you're trying to teach yourself, or not. You teach yourself, but you're also trying to understand how this functions. So if I were to take that number system, and that's what you all need to do. That's the assimilation. You're assimilating that, extracting that information, that resource, and that resource, everyone, is that number system. And you take that, and then you innovate. That's the last section. So part of these practicing have that quote in your head every time you practice. You want to imitate, assimilate, and then innovate. And you take that information and you say, okay, so I know the root 7 3 6 5 2 7 1. So if I do it in F, for instance, if I do, or I'll do it up here, root 7 6 7. I'm sorry. There we go. There we go. Root 7 3 6 5 2 2 7 1. So now what I just did is I took an information where if I was just doing it the traditional way, just kind of like, okay, I'm going through these motions, but now what I'm doing is I'm trying to make it fun for myself by actually trying to understand the information. And that's the disconnect that I learned recently, and I discovered with my students, that when they practice, there's not a connection musically. So always remember, everybody, that you're playing music at the end of the day. It's music. It's music that you're presenting. It's music that you're learning. It's music that you're trying to inspire and really push forward. So when you sit home and you're practicing, that is your purpose. You always have to remember that. That is your purpose. You always need to know what your purpose is behind the practicing. What is the intent of what you're learning? Okay? So if I'm learning this C major scale, what is the intent behind that? So I'm going to give you an example. Now, for all of you who play instruments, okay, take the concept and the theoretical side of this. But for my bass players, this is another way, since I'm playing bass, you can see how I'm doing this. So if I'm learning C major scale, I want to make a concept. So I say, okay, what if for every other note, I'll accent. So, like I'm creating swing. And so now I'm like, okay, so then what if now I create it where I sort of make the scale more rhythmic, okay? So if I just do, I mixed in a couple of different rhythms. When you're practicing this, you're practicing execution. That's not a term that's used quite often when you're talking about practicing. So when you practice, you're trying to execute something. And so it's more than just the music that you're trying to learn. You're executing a whole bunch of other facets. You're trying to execute rhythm, precision, consistency. You're trying to execute intonation. You're trying to execute the center of the pitch. So every time you hit that pitch, your body, your ears, your hand, it all feels it. It feels it. So I teach my bass students that on the fret, this is a fretless instrument. So you have to be able to feel where that note is, and every time you feel that vibration of that note, it's something that becomes part of you. So while you're practicing, try to do that. So if you're a saxophonist, make more try to do more breathing. So when you're playing a scale, like try your best to create the most solid tone that you can get through a short amount of space. Okay? Same with brass players. All right? Also the same for my drummers. A lot of drummers think that they can't practice scales. Yes, you can. I actually demonstrated yesterday to a friend of mine who is starting to now get into a lot more jazz drumming. And he said, man, you play with such rhythmic precision on your bass. and your quarter notes. And I say, well, I actually learned that from playing with really great drummers, because really great drummers practice these things. Their rudiments is treated like scales. And so all of these very fundamentals, if you hear me kind of talking about, I'm talking about very simple fundamentals. Those fundamentals matter. So while you're practicing, enjoy it. Don't make it a robotic job. Not okay. You don't do that. It's music. You have to remember, at the end of the day, you're playing music. Even if it's a scale, you're playing music. Even if you're learning a tune, and the tune is really hard. But again, when you practice, you need to remember you're trying to execute something. And if you seek out to do that execution, it will always work. So for instance, this is how I like to play my scales. I actually like to make them into walking bass lines. And I'll sit there and go through a few choruses. I'll play the scale up and down maybe 2 or 3 times. I'll just do that a few times. And then I'll change it up. I'll double up. Doing the thirds. Now I'm thinking outside of the box. So if I wanted to take my scale and create like bass lines, you can do the exact same thing on a horn. You know, I don't know if a lot of I don't know too many horn players that practice doing bass lines or practice walking quarter notes. You know, opposed to making it feel like a scale, but trying to emulate like that rhythmic. Now what you're doing is you're executing your breathing technique on how you accent certain notes, how you articulate certain notes. You know, that's a breathing thing. You know, that's an embouchure thing. And so take those, that's the assimilation. You're extracting those concepts that your teachers and everybody's been teaching you. And when you practice it, you have to perform it. So if you practice it like you perform it, like with an intent, have an intent behind it, then every time you play it, it will feel natural for you. That's the disconnect that I noticed lately that was happening, is they were so bored of what they were doing, they weren't enjoying it, because they didn't realize that they're still playing music, and there has to be an intent. And when that intent is behind it and that purpose is there, when you practice, it all comes together, and then you start to hear it fall into place. Okay? So, my last point that I want to leave is this. When you do practice, I don't want you to ever get into this rut, right? And I'm going to show you. So if I'm doing the scales, and then you do this. You do what we call the feel-good practicing, where whatever it is that you are practicing, you're not enjoying it to the point where you start to drift off into the mindless practicing and doing things that you can already play to make yourself feel good about the time that you're spending on your instrument. That is wasteful. Okay? So even if you're not enjoying how you're sounding, you need to enjoy the fact that you're able to do it. And that is a strong statement to stand on, because if you don't enjoy what you're doing, there's no purpose. Again, there's no purpose behind it. So even if you're practicing something that you know you sound bad, you sound like trash, or it's like, oh my gosh, I can't bear this. This is painful. It's okay, right? You need to find ways to make it enjoyable. So maybe instead of playing it in a traditional way, maybe play it in different styles. So you know you do something like calypso, or you have the something a little more straight. You know, find different ways to enjoy making it happen. And when you do that, again, you're kind of multitasking. You're saying, okay, I'm shedding on different styles. I'm shedding on my technique, my fundamentals. I'm working on my ear harmonically. I'm working on my precision, of executing whatever rhythmic things or harmonic things I'm working on, and trying to be consistent. So there's more to just doing the boring traditional stuff. You can open that palette up. All right, and that's my final point. And I really believe, one last thing, I really believe too, that if you take the time to really understand that quote that Clark Terry left us with, to imitate, to try to take in this information you're learning and do it verbatim, because that's information, that's a language, that's information that you're gaining to learn a language. Okay, and then you assimilate that information, you break it down. Okay, so again, like I talked about the number system and the scale degrees, when you're picking out those scales, those are number systems. So however way you formulate that is going to create some melodic content. And again, going back to my beginning point, try to create melodies out of whatever it is you're practicing, or try to do something rhythmically and stylistically that's different from what you're doing, to give you a different perspective. Okay, and make it to where you're actually learning the song, learning whatever it is you're working on, versus just doing it. Okay, that's it. That's all I got right now.
Brandon, solid. That was awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, man. This is a really great topic, because I think a lot of young folks really struggle with just how to think out of the box. They are programmed. I was programmed that way, just being taught to just do it one way. And who's to say that you can't practice without having fun? And there has to be joy behind that. Like, you have to really enjoy what you're doing. Like, I enjoy doing these things. I enjoy sharing knowledge. I enjoy playing the bass. I make it with an intention to live that way, because you only get one life. You only get one chance and one shot to do it. So if you're going to spend hours at a time doing something by yourself, practicing whatever literature that you're learning, make it enjoyable, make it with an intent, so that way that is fostered into your playing, and it's natural for you when you present it to an audience and they get it. They'll get it right off the bat. They won't question it. They won't ever sit there and look at you and say, oh my God, what's going on? Because the audience will always remember your first and your last note. And if you've practiced enough to captivate them right off the bat, you got it. Nothing else you have to do. Your practice is all worth it. So, I need to write a book.
Love it, man. Some inspiring words of wisdom from Brandon Robertson. Brandon's back with us on May 11th. Tuesday, May 11th, so check out the upcoming sessions at clearwaterjazz.com. Shout out to Tyler Wertman. I see he's with us today. What's up, Tyler? Tyler's been with us and been doing great as well. We've loved having Tyler with these sessions. Thanks, man. And for everybody that's been out there following along as we've been developing these sessions, thank you for participating.
Yes.
And we hope that you're really enjoying them. If you have a special topic you'd like us to cover, all you got to do is email us at info@clearwaterjazz.com, and we'll make it happen. So keep being creative out there. Keep playing. Keep practicing. That's what we talked about today.
Yeah.
And stay in touch with us. We've enjoyed seeing many of you also at our Wanderlust music series, and we're making an announcement real soon about the 2021 Clearwater Jazz Holiday in October. So stay connected at clearwaterjazz.com. And thank you to everybody, and thank you to our sponsors, Blue Water Wealth Management at Steward Partners, Duke Energy, Marine Max Clearwater, and the many others that support Clearwater Jazz Holiday Festival tradition and Clearwater Jazz Holiday mission of music, education, and outreach. We'll see everybody back real soon. Take care, Brandon.
Take care, man. Thank you.